Hey y'all, I'm Jerdy, and in this video, we're going to go over what to expect going from Season of Discovery to Blizzard's 20th anniversary Fresh Classic servers. Now before we get started, I want to go over the fact that it might sound really negative on some of the comparisons I'm bringing up on SoD versus Classic, but I'm just giving y'all the honest differences from the two versions. A lot of people I know, their first go around of Classic was Season of Discovery. So when they're going into Fresh, there's a lot of things they might not realize don't exist in this version of the game. I loved Classic 19 and I love Season of Discovery. So I'm not going to tell you which one's better. I'm just going to give y'all the honest differences. And with that being said, let's get on with the video. So one thing that might be kind of obvious, but also not, is that there are no runes. All the runes and abilities you got from these runes in Season of Discovery do not exist in Classic. It is the bare bone version of this game. Think of your character in SoD without all of their runes. For some classes like Paladins, specifically DPS and Tank Paladins, almost all of our abilities don't exist in Classic. But the good thing is there's not going to be any meta warlocks just running around, just a bunch of demons and Stormwind, and there won't be druids just two-shotting people in the middle of the open world, because I really hate that in SoD. So I'm happy to see that go away. But like I mentioned earlier, there aren't any runes in Classic, which unfortunately decimates some of the classes like Paladins. Season of Discovery did a really great job of balancing the classes in a PvE aspect. Classic is the bare bone version of every class and spec, the original version of each class. So Prot and Red Paladins, as well as a bunch of other class spec combos like Balanced Druid, Shadow Priest, Beast Mastery Hunter, Arms Warrior, even though they kind of suck in SoD 2 actually, are what we call meme specs. And I don't mean that as in they just underperform over the top specs. I mean that in a lot of them just can't perform at all. Again, Prot Paladin, we don't have a taunt in Classic. We have like 2 abilities in Classic. And I'm not kidding, we have like 2 or 3 abilities in Classic. Our threat gen is non-existent. Unless we have 25 warriors in our raid to spam Greater Blessings of Kings on them, we don't have threat. And no, I'm not kidding. That's how you hold threat as a Prot Paladin in Classic. If you want a DPS, you play Fury Warrior, Rogue, Mage, Warlock, or like Feral. Hunter works too, maybe a Shadow Priest. And if you want a tank, Fury Prot Warrior or Feral Druid. That's it. And if you want to heal, Holy Paladin or Priest. Even though these raid teams are much larger in Classic than they are in SoD, which we'll get to in a second, a lot of guilds and pug groups aren't going to be too welcoming of a meme spec into their raid team. So you may want to do some research on what's truly viable going into Classic if you care. But just like certain class spec combinations matter, your race class combo also matters as well. For example, humans on the Alliance side outshine all other races as warriors due to their mace and sword specialization racial skills, their +5 swords, +5 maces skill. Remember, there are no ring runes in the game to balance this out. In order for a non-human warrior to compete on Alliance, they would need to get a special pair of gloves called Edge Master Handguards, an epic, very rare world drop that will guarantee to run you out of all of your gold to obtain them. Again, if you don't care, then this doesn't matter, but expect to see a lot of human warriors in this class fantasy game. And as I mentioned a bit ago, Classic has 40-man raid teams. At the beginning of SoD, there was kind of an argument and like a debate on should we get 40-man raid teams back. And personally, as a guild leader of a 20-man raid team, I'm kind of happy they're not back. I struggle running 1 to 2 20-man raid teams. So me running a 40-man, I'd probably be dead by now. But 40-man raid teams are a very unique and very cool thing to be a part of. And I'm actually excited personally to be in a 40-man raid team again going into Classic. Plus, more people always means more drama, and drama is always entertaining. I was a part of a guild in Classic 19 that had 4 different 40-man raid teams, and we would have over 200 people online at once. And that is something truly special to be a part of. Another difference from SoD to Classic is that this go around, there are no level caps or leveling phases. It's level 1 to 60. Classic is a level 1 to 60 journey. There are no level up raids. There's no stopping points. You can get to 60 as fast as possible if you wanted to. Like 40-man raid teams, leveling is truly a unique and special experience in Classic. It is one of the main parts, if not the main part of this game. If you didn't get to experience this in 2019 or in 2004, I advise you to really take your time and smell the flowers on Azeroth if this is your first go around. Cherish each bag that drops, every green item you loot, your first pair of shoulders, and every dungeon you do, because you will love it. And since we're on the topic of dungeons and gear, your pre-bis gear will last you a really long time at level 60. Because this version of Classic will be shorter than 2019 and 2004, you should not expect to be fully bissed out like you were in SoD. Remember, in SoD, we had different difficulties of raids that offered bonus loot. That does not exist in Classic. There is one difficulty of each raid. There is a set amount of items that drop, and it's not a lot. And raid teams are 40 people, not 20. So your pre-bis is super important, and you shouldn't expect to ever really be fully bissed out in this game. You'll be back in Molten Core while you're in Blackwing Lair. You'll be fighting in Molten Core while you're in AQ too to get better gear. You're not getting all your gear when that phase is current, unless they're funneling you, which more power to you if they are. And remember, if you're playing a Fury Warrior, there's like 10 plus at least other Fury Warriors in your group. So you're competing for a lot of the same gear. I had that stupid level 58 Sword of Zeal on my Dwarf Warrior in 2019 until the end of Blackwing Lair. That's when I finally got Krolsharok. So I understand this pain of not getting bis gear. And while we're talking about bis gear, depending on what you pick, you might look like a clown in your bis gear, but you will look like a cool clown. SoD really made it so your best in slot gear was your gear. If you were a plate wearer, you wore plate. If you were a leather wearer, you wore leather. You wore your gear, you wore your tier. But in Classic, however, your best in slot might not make you as cool as you think, or maybe it does because you love it. But it's truly the charm of vanilla. Get ready to see a lot of paladins in green dresses and a lot of warriors in leather. And as you're farming your pre-bis gear, the dungeons you do in Classic will be a lot longer, but also more special when you complete them. SoD's power scaling was insane. We just melted through dungeons at Endgame. I can solo Blackrock Depths my prop paladin. That is not the case in Classic. Those Endgame dungeons can and will be brutal. Get ready to spend a lot of time in Blackrock Depths, Strathholm, Skullomance. Don't think you're gonna be in and out in 20 minutes, because you're not. But again, like I said, this is special, not necessarily a bad thing. The LFD tool, however, is also coming to Fresh and is currently present in SoD right now. This is identical to the one that was in Wrath Classic if you played it, and will not teleport you to the dungeon, but will just make it easier to find groups without needing the LFG bulletin board add-on. But let's talk about the other quality of life aspects also coming into Classic that are available in SoD right now, like instant mail between tunes on the same account. It used to be an hour-long wait no matter who it was. Now, if you have one alt who maybe has some of your bags or your gold, you can send it over to your main and it'll be in your mailbox instantly. There should be no buff and debuff limit in this version of Classic. And if you don't know what that is, let's say you have all your world buffs and you have every consume buff possible and you have raid buffs. There was only a certain amount of buffs you could have on your character at a time. So if you got that one renew or that one rejuve, it could push off a world buff, and that happened a lot. But now that's not going to be a thing anymore in this go around. They're also going to bring chrono boons into the game at the start of Classic, not later on down the line, like they did in 2019. And they're also bringing back SoD's PvP ranking system, which is much more accessible to players. I know some of these things will really upset the Classic purists, but I gotta be honest with y'all, I think most people just don't care. Again, if these are the things that you loved about Classic, I'm sorry they're not keeping them, but we can't play the same way we played during 2019 and 2004. A lot of people really want, and this is a whole nother video, side note, a quick rant, they want the Classic 19 experience all over again. And unless we're in another pandemic where everyone's doing nothing but playing games 24/7, you can't recreate that. And I'd rather not be in another worldwide pandemic. I think a lot of us can say we're tired of living through historical events, but I'm getting way off topic. Let's talk about some other things now. So what we're going to talk about now is the changes in world buffs going from SoD to Classic, and this really only matters if you play on the PvP server. But let's first talk about the thing I hated the most dealing with on my server back in Classic 19, and that's the Dispel meta. So if you don't know what that is, in Season of Discovery, all of our world buffs were physical buffs, meaning the only way you lost them is if you clicked them off or if you died. In Classic though, a lot of these world buffs were magic labeled buffs, meaning they could be dispelled by the enemy faction or even by Gar and Molten Core. Now, Chrono Boons do fix a lot of this issue because you can keep your Dire Maul tribute buffs just by booning up while you're still in the instance. The Horde can get you there, you're safe. But for Songflower, I see the Dispel meta coming back big time for that buff in particular. It might look safe when you're picking that flower at 3 a.m. There might not be a single Horde in sight until you finally get it, and then you hear that sound and you look behind you and there's the Shadow Priest that was in ghost form and rezzed just for you. And you can kill him and you can spam X, or you're sitting on him and you feel like you got something, you got your revenge, but he still got that buff off you. You still don't have Songflower. So I foresee the Dispel meta coming back, at least for Songflower in particular. The next thing is that there is no Might of Stormwind buff in Classic. That's a Season of Discovery only thing. Might of Stormwind was added to be the equivalent of the Rend buff on the Horde side. Only Horde will have access to this buff in Classic. In order for Alliance players to get this buff, they need to be mind controlled in Orgrimmar or by the Crossroads at the Barrens by a Horde priest to obtain this buff. And yes, people like me did go get this buff. And the last thing I want to talk about regarding world buffs is the Dark Moon Faire. So in SoD and Classic, the Dark Moon Faire lasts 1 week, but in SoD, it goes away for a week and then comes back the next week in the opposite faction. For Classic, it's only there 1 week and then you have to wait another month for it to come back, but then it's in the opposite faction area. So it's only in your area once every 2 months. If you're on the PvP server, good luck getting it when it's on the opposite faction side, because there will be people there 24/7 ready to take you out if you try to get that buff. And remember, a big change in SoD recently was that if you lose the buff, you can get it again in 10 seconds. In Classic, it's 4 hours online or 8 hours offline in a major city. So it is much harder to get this buff when it's on the opposite faction in Classic. Again, all these things only really matter, 1, if you're on the PvP server, and 2, if you're really trying to min-max. If you don't care about any of that, then none of this is going to matter to you going into Classic Fresh. Just expect a lot of griefing on the PvP servers. I know I sound like I'm dogging on it, but that's probably the server I'm going to end up playing on anyway. So one thing that matters for all aspects of Classic though are professions, specifically like alchemy, where we had these procs added in Season of Discovery. That does not exist in Classic. You make 1 of each item, 1 flask, 1 Arcanite transmute. You cannot proc multiple. So expect consumables and pretty much everything in Classic to be a lot more expensive versus how it is in Season of Discovery. And world bosses are not instanced in Classic. They will be competitive and it will be amazing and epic to witness these showdowns, but just realize that you might not get to witness these because these fights might be happening at like 3 in the morning. But if you do get to be a part of it, just know it's a pretty awesome thing to see. Like I mentioned earlier, because of the pandemic, I was actually able to be a part of a lot of these world boss fights, and they are indeed pretty freaking epic. So if you get an opportunity to be a part of one, just know you will never forget those moments. And I think that's it. I think I've covered just about everything. Let me know if I missed anything down in the comments below. Guys, I actually don't know where I'm going to play. Part of me really wants to play Paladin still, and I was leveling 1 on hardcore and I actually kind of enjoyed it, but I don't want to have to end up playing on a PvE server. I've always played on PvP, but I've also always played Alliance. And part of me deep down inside wants to be that POS cringe undead rogue this go around and finally play Horde in Classic. Let me know where maybe you'd want to see me. If you haven't already, follow me on twitch.tv/dirtyjd. If you're not watching your favorite streamer in the OnlyFans Guild play Classic Hardcore, maybe consider watching me, right? Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube if you haven't. I'm only 60 subs away from 1,000. Please help me get to that goal if you like this video. And as always, thanks for stopping by and saying hi, and I'll see y'all in Tirisfal? Maybe Elwyn, who knows?